Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this episode, the last for Season 4, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis chat about the season's overall theme of due diligence as a governance process across industries. They also provide another example in dam safety and discuss the relevance of WHS, OHS in legislation and prosecutions. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, please give us a rating and also don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. If you'd like more information on R2A's work or have any feedback or topic ideas, head to r2a.com.au and we'll be back for Season 5 in 2025.
Hi Richard, welcome to the wrap-up of Season 4, 40 episodes down, can you believe it?
It's very hard to believe, Gaye, now that you mention it.
So, Season 4 we focused on, some industry-based case studies or examples of which we've applied the due diligence process to. And I think one of the outcomes is that the due diligence process is a governance process. It's focused at the
High consequence, low likelihood things, i.e. not at risk.
Not at risk.
And therefore does not follow the risk management standard.
And when we use the word risk, we mean the appreciation of consequence.
Simultaneous appreciation of likelihood and consequence.
Okay, thank you for finishing my sentences.
That's good.
We've been doing a lot of these, haven't we?
Yep.
So I guess the way to bring it all together in this particular episode, and we've got a couple of other observations that we've had over the last sort of few months or so, is maybe to use dam safety as an example.
Indeed.
And the due diligence process, the four key areas that we look at, or the four key tasks are completeness check. What are the critical issues?
Yep.
What are the controls you can put in place in the circumstances, which ones are reasonable, and then a QA system to make sure that the ones that you agree to are sustained.
And the dam safety people are pretty clear on this. Dam break's the one that motivates them the most, and so they look at the worst case flood that could result from a total dam break, and they don't really care about likelihood. They're just saying, if that happened, how bad could it be?
And that takes into account a whole lot of different things, doesn't it? And we probably touched on it in the bushfire episode that we did, and it's really about the vulnerability.
Correct.
Are there people exposed to the potential flood from this dam?
And then, in that case, what are your options and what's available to you, and in the circumstances, what's reasonable? And that's where the mechanisms by which these things could happen become particularly important.
And ANCOD, I think, interestingly, although they still use the term ALAP, I think, which we've had many discussions with the dam safety people, but what they have done is they've sort of got a graph, but it's got an upper limit to where it becomes prohibitively dangerous, I guess.
Yep.
But what they've done is they've taken away that lower limit. There's no lower limit to risk.
Correct. So they actually basically stopped using target levels of risk and safety for the most part. I mean, if you conclude something's prohibitively dangerous, you've got to stop it. Now, precisely how you come to that view is an interesting question. But if you've got any doubts about the dam, basically if you've got doubts about a dam, you pretty much start draining the dam if there is things and people at risk.
And I think that was one of the questions we had. We had one of the regulators come in and there was a dam above a community. Yep. And it was higher than the houses.
The water level was higher than the roof of the houses down immediately below the dam. And the dam safety regulator turned up and sort of was looking at it, sort of looking with the policeman, looking at that, saying, how the hell do those houses get there? What planning scheme let that happen?
Which we have touched on again in this season, bushfire again, and also major hazard facilities and that planning. So like everything, the due diligence approach is not a cookie cutter approach. You can apply a similar process, but it's about actually thinking the things through that are actually relevant to your particular circumstances.
Yep.
I gave a talk at Co-op Federation leadership conference or workshop recently in the last month, and they were mainly co-op retail facilities, but they also provided services like crop dusting and water haulage and things like that. So they had a whole range of things that were potential issues for them. But one of the chairs came up to me after the session and said, okay, I get it now. It's all about the process and documenting the process in a diligent manner to say that we've actually thought through the things that we could be exposed to. the things that we can do, and then making sure that we put those in place.
Well, we've discussed this many times, but it's not about being right, it's about being diligent. And you can always be diligent, but you can't always be right. And that's the point.
I think one of the other interesting things that has sort of come out of this session, and we did another podcast of it, was the relevance of the WHS and OHS legislation.
Yeah, it's driving everything. I think when I told you we had that, I think we mentioned in the previous podcast, but I had that discussion with a fellow doing a PhD on how security and fire integrated together, and we had a security guy and me, and he was talking to both of us, and he asked a question at the end, and both the security guys sort of looked at each other and said, it's got to be harmonised, and it's all got to go, and it's all driven by the Work Health and Safety legislation. And this research was sort of, you both agree on this point, because we were from completely different backgrounds with completely different understandings. He was a ex-military fellow who'd gone into security, and I was a fire engineer, factory military trained HPR engineer, and we were of one mind. And I think he was really genuinely surprised.
But even when we work with organisations, I don't think they sort of think that the WHS legislation is almost off to the side. Safety is still being thought about in a silo almost.
Also, fire protection. Well, you may recall we did Q1. Perhaps I shouldn't say these things, but the fire engineers were so relieved when the due diligence engineers turned up and started speaking WHS.
Yeah, so, WHS and safety should be business as usual, should be integrated into all of these aspects. And I think it does allow all of those things to be brought together in an integrated sense.
Yeah. The other thing which we were going to talk about, which you were particularly going to focus on, was what we discovered about prosecutions, because there's a lot of WHS prosecutions going on, and it does seem that the longer the state has had the legislation in place, the more likely they are to prosecute. So Victoria's got about 10 years on every other jurisdiction. We're about double the prosecutions from what I've seen of the various websites. But we sort of discovered this thing following on from that conference you attended last year and talking to an ex-regulator from WA.
And the information that came out of that, I guess, was that they're typically prosecuting small to medium-sized organisations.
Because it's more likely to be successful.
Because it's more likely to be successful. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The distance between the board members and the senior executive management and the people that are working on the ground is a lot smaller, distance-wise, in small and medium-sized organisations, where it's quite large still in larger organisations. So the notion of the corporate veil is still working.
The big organisations can hire bigger, better lawyers and presumably more expert witnesses, and it's just harder to get them.
And we sort of tried this proposition, I guess, at one of our courses quite recently, and that you're right, there was a regulator or ex-regulator from WA there, and they said that's exactly what's happening. They said what they're trying to do is they're trying to make examples of organisations, and it's easier to prosecute, successfully prosecute.
Well, that flows on to the comment we made previously, and it's a source of frustration to us. There are two types of regulators: those who think that the number of successful prosecutions are a measure of success, and those who think that the number of successful prosecutions are a measure of failure. And it does seem this decade has turned into the decade of the number of successful prosecutions as a measure of success.
And which is really interesting, and there may be a couple of other reasons for that. Regulators seem to be having less technical expertise in their organisation.
I don't think they can get the people. I don't know that that's by choice, by the way.
Yeah, but that's another observation. And one of the ways that they can do it is by doing that sort of compliance audit.
Yeah, if it doesn't comply, it's something that we've got you.
So, as I guess a full wrap-up of this season is, we've talked about a number of industries. We've talked about dam safety today and bushfires, major hazard facilities. We talked about rail, and we've talked about, in another episode, we talked about electricity industry. So the due diligence process is really, really useful for those high consequence, low likelihood events. And if you look at all the controls that could be put in place and determine what's reasonable in the circumstances, what else can you do? You've been diligent. And Richard's line, you can't be right all the time, which engineers like to, try to be. But you can be diligent. And I think this governance and due diligence approach is asking people to think about the key issues of concern and make sure that they're being managed properly.
Well, that was basically what I was retained, to give that expert witness advice in the Cuddly Creek fire. And what I was asked basically was the process that the defendant undertook reasonable in the circumstances.
And what else could you do?
That's basically the point.
We've talked about a lot of other sessions that you're not going to stop all things going wrong.
You're not going to stop all bushfires. It's not going to happen.
No. But was there anything else you could do? And I think that's, when people get cranky.
Reasonably can do.
When people get cranky, when there's something that could have been done, if it had been done, would have stopped it going wrong or would have mitigated the consequences in some way.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us, Season 4, and we will be back with Season 5 very soon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
everyone. Season 5, huh?